Hey everyone, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. For those of you tuning in from wherever you are, Periscope, YouTube, Facebook, we want to welcome you to another episode of Nihal interviews with Baitul Mal. And today we have a special guest. We have, and actually, now that I think about it, we've done actually 2 or 3 of these interviews now. We've spoken to Brother Khair al-Alam about the Rohingya. We've spoken to Dr. Shireen al-Adaimi about Yemen, and we spoke to Sister Linda Sarsour about Lebanon. And today we are joined with a special guest, Chaplain Jaye Starr, who's going to be talking to us about her time in Peru and some of the work that she does and how it inspired her to go into chaplaincy. For those of you that would like to know, Jaye Starr is an aspiring healthcare chaplain, a board member with the Association of Muslim Chaplains, and an ethics committee member at a large research hospital. She's a graduate of Hartford Seminary's Islamic chaplaincy program with 3 units of clinical pastoral education. And we'll talk about that momentarily. What is CPE? Jaye has previously volunteered with previous disaster relief organizations and worked with the American Red Cross. So without any further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce and bring on Chaplain Jaye Starr. Assalamu alaikum, Jaye. How are you doing?
Walaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for having me. Alhamdulillah. I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
Good, good. Sunny day today. How's your Ramadan going?
Alhamdulillah. It's a blessing.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. That's cool. So tell us about yourself. Tell us about the work that you do. I know we'd spoken previously about how your relief work was pretty defining as to what path you chose in life to take and to what to make your career out of and the projects that you got involved in. Why don't you share that with our viewers?
Yeah, sure. So I came into chaplaincy a little bit through the back door. I had the fortune, as it were, of graduating from college right before Hurricane Katrina struck. I was serving out of college as a racial justice educator on the Amistad. And like many nonprofits, when Hurricane Katrina struck, our funding dried up. And so shortly after I joined the crew, the captain sat us down and informed us that we were going to lose our jobs because, like many organizations, they didn't have the funding to keep us on. So I had no money, but a lot of time, and ended up jumping into the Katrina relief effort as a result of that. And I went down thinking I'd sort of work 2 weeks and I'd, get really dirty and work really hard and then go on and find a job. And I ended up staying as a volunteer for several months. And what I saw there had a significant impact on how I understood the complexities of the world, and also developed an interest in me in thinking about how we address secondary trauma. So the trauma that those supporting people with trauma incur through that work. A huge number of the relief workers after Katrina were right out of college. Much of the disaster relief infrastructure that we have today domestically was developed through the Katrina response. There's a lot more built in now for thinking about developing resilience among disaster relief workers that wasn't present at that time, and a desire to bring that element of self-care and well-being into disaster response work is a big part of what led me in to chaplaincy, both for the people doing the work and then also for the communities that are served. One of the things that we were doing after Katrina was gutting out people's homes. They'd sat for months filled with ocean water, and we removed everything down to the bare bones of the house and threw out all of their possessions. And oftentimes owners would need to talk about that, frequently sitting and talking with people, and not really talking, but listening as they talked about that experience. Several years later, I found myself working with the American Red Cross, doing disaster work, but mostly doing refugee services. And part of that was delivering death notifications to widows who had lost their husbands in the Srebrenica massacre, or their sons and their brothers and their fathers. I was really well trained in paperwork, but not so well how to be present with people through the delivery of that news. And I read Kate Bastrap's book, Here If You Need Me, which is written by a Unitarian Universalist chaplain about her work. I thought, that's it. Those are the skills that I want to be able to bring into disaster relief work and humanitarian work. So that's what led me on the
So it's called When You
chaplain. Here If You Need Me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I Googled it and a Bruce Springsteen song came up and I was just like...
Not fan of Bruce Springsteen, but not... Yeah. Yeah, Here If You Need Me by Kate Bastrap. And it's just a really beautiful display through storytelling of the work that she does as a chaplain. That was exactly the skill set that I was looking at bringing into the work that I was already doing.
That's pretty amazing. And another follow-up question, Katrina happened, I think, what, 2004 or 5, was it?
Yeah, fall of 2005.
Yeah, and where were you based? Were you in like Louisiana or in Houston, or because I know it was a very largely affected area when Katrina did
Huge.
hit.
Yeah, I was in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Oh wow.
So New Orleans itself really had an infrastructure disaster layered on top of it, whereas Biloxi had other problems, but it was double hit by a 17-foot storm surge.
Wow.
Had a huge impact on the community there. And I spent some time in New Orleans as well, but most of my time was in Biloxi.
And how was the situation like when it came to like looking at the worst hit areas? I mean, I assume you had a chance to really survey overall like the entire region while you were, or a significant portion of it. But like, how did it look at that point? Because I guess, and this actually hits on something else, because when we talk, and when I say we, I'm talking about Americans or Muslims that live in like bigger city areas. We don't think about how in our own nation there are places like Flint, for example, where there's a water crisis. There are places where, you know, if you are, I remember living in Georgia, in a part of Georgia where if you call the police, let's say for something, you're so far out that you don't get the response from the city police. You get it from like the county police. And we forget that a lot of these services or whatnot that may be available to the average person living in New York or in you know, or in Chicago or in LA, you know, that's the standard, but that's not the standard in Mississippi, like for example, as you mentioned, right? I'm sure it's a very different situation, and the dynamics are different. I mean, I don't know how you know, how you could speak to that potentially, maybe.
Yeah, you know, so I think one of the things that I realized in my time responding to Katrina was the way that systemic and institutional racism had the world that we live in, which was something I had sort of academically understood, but wasn't as much a part of my lived experience. And along the Gulf Coast, it is so incredibly apparent when you look at who lives where. So, for example, you know, specifically when you think about things like hurricanes, you look at who lives in the high ground and who lives on the low ground, and there's a huge racial line that's drawn there that correlates with class as well. And you see the ways in which people have been pushed to and fro. You can also look at the ways that the climate change is having a tremendously disproportionate impact on particularly Native American communities that are around that region today, as they need to think about what potentially drastic steps like resettlement would look like, as the lands that they've sort of been relegated to through the U.S. government's actions against them over generations are being lost rapidly to climate change.
Yeah. You know, I was actually reading something recently about Algiers, Louisiana. I don't know if you're familiar with
I am
Algiers.
familiar with Algiers. I have been to Algiers, yeah.
Yeah. And I was reading about it, and what was really interesting, I actually was Googling it. I was just reading something about like French America and whatnot. And, you know, Algiers, you know, in reference to a city in Algeria, which happened to be colonized also by the French, it was such a beautiful city that they wanted to rename it after their colony there, right? So they called this area Algiers, but because of Jim Crow laws, blacks were not allowed to live there, like literally not allowed. And I was thinking about that aspect as well, because, you know, historically, where you have black communities, and when people talk about how black communities are disproportionately discriminated against today, it's a result of those decisions made so many years ago. It's a result of those laws of which placed black people in certain neighborhoods by force because of Jim Crow, and which, sad to say, a lot of what we call the safe suburbs, right, is a dominantly white area regulated by law to whites once upon a time. Hence, of the economic disparity that exists there as well.
Yeah.
And right here, sorry, I want to mention one more thing. There was a tweet I saw, and it was somebody mentioning to someone else saying, "Oh, you shouldn't go to that area because it's a bad neighborhood," and they're like, "It's just Black people living. That's what you're calling like a bad neighborhood." But I was just thinking about it from there, like to be displaced so many generations later, and for us as a nation to call ourselves like, this American exceptionalism that exists. It hasn't even been like 200 and some years before these laws were enacted and have caused the intergenerational trauma that they've caused. But yeah.
Well, and I would hold up that it's not just the sort of Jim Crow laws, because I think when we sort of saying it in Jim Crow allows those of us in the North to say this is a Southern problem. We didn't do it here, but we've had legal systems that have had even more or similar contributing factors to the way it works. And I think one of the things that you see, so for example, is if you look at where garbage dumps are built or where factories that emit a lot of emissions are located, this is true here, but it's true elsewhere in the world too. But you'll find that they are overwhelmingly around communities that have been economically impacted time and time again, and that the health, and so particularly Black, but you'll see it also with Native populations as well in some cases, that the impact that it has on people's health is tremendous, and is generationally, like intergenerationally impacting as well. And I think one of the things that came out of Katrina that really surprised a lot of people, I remember this sort of idea, and particularly white people saying like that it looks like a third world country, and we could unpack that term too. But this idea that Black people being evacuated off of rooftops and in boats, because the population that was left to need to be evacuated out of New Orleans was overwhelmingly African American. And yet I think that image of America helped to bring to light something that has been going on a lot longer and helps people to see a challenge that we have created through our legal mechanisms based on racism that have existed throughout this country's history.
Yeah. And I think that's what people need to really become aware of, because I don't think we'll really understand the disparity of America without the disparity in our history and the disparity of how colonization affected so many people afterwards. But I did want to actually,
Sorry. Well, I was just thinking, I mean, one of the things that had happened was that a lot of Black people in New Orleans didn't believe that their homes had been flooded because of Katrina. They believed that the government had blown up the dam, which was a completely valid feeling to have, because the government had done that during a previous hurricane. They'd blown up a dam to flood the Black communities to save the white communities. And so when we think about why there's vaccine hesitancy right now among certain Black communities, among many Black communities, it comes out of this legacy of abuse of power time and time and time again.
Yeah, Tuskegee, right? Like that's the thing. Yeah. Like that's the thing. What incident was it where a dam was blown up to flood other people's homes?
I believe that was Hurricane, oh gosh, I want to say it was Camilla in 1968, but I might be wrong about that.
Okay.
I'm a little bit out of practice on my Gulf Coast history.
It's okay. But yeah, I mean, that's it's sad. It's sad, and not only that, it's sadder when we don't even realize that there are people here at home that need our help. I was actually thinking about the idea of like zakat, because a lot of times people don't understand that it's better to give ones, like according to like Islamic law, you're supposed to give your zakat to people that are near you, that are people that are around you in your community, so that the money flows in the community. But so often, and there's nothing wrong with it, people send their zakat to like people overseas and whatnot, but it's actually preferable to give it locally so that your money flows locally, But I wanted to actually jump to something else. So you were on the ground in Katrina in Mississippi, and then you headed over to Peru, right? Some years later, was it 2 years later?
Yeah, 2 years later.
So tell us about that. What led you to kind of make that? What was going on in Peru at the time that you had gone over there? We'd also mentioned that recently there's been a lot of political strife in the country for the last 4 years or so. But back in 2007 or 2008, when you had gone, what brought you there?
Yeah, well, I think the short answer is I was sort of young and dumb. Um, the, the more complicated answer, because I mean, in many ways, you know what Peru needed. I went after the 2007 earthquake, and in many ways, what they needed was money. I went for reasons that I think I can recognize now. I don't think I could have named them at the time, but the bonds that developed through the Katrina response effort were really magical. There's a sort of shared language, that, if you will, that you can speak with to people who have experienced the same intense situations as others. And I went from Katrina after several months. I went abroad for 6 months, doing some other work in Europe, and I didn't speak about Katrina for those whole 6 months. And I flew back on the 1 year anniversary. We put up in 48 hours. We put up a theatrical production about the volunteer experience, and I played the lead role in it. And it brought back sort of everything I'd compartmentalized and stuck in a box and not addressed for the year preceding it. And in the year that followed, I found myself speaking to Katrina about anybody, to just constantly to anyone who would listen to me. And I can recognize now through chaplaincy training that I was trying to do the meaning making. I was trying to release the emotional energy that experience had for me. And if you talk with people, you know, after they've experienced something significant, often there's, we call it like verbal diarrhea, right? So there's just like constant talking and talking and talking about it. And I found myself trapped in that cycle. And now as a chaplain, I can recognize that and name it and be able to sort of see where you can help a person do that processing work. But at the time, I didn't have a framework for understanding it. And so when the 2007 earthquake happened, it was sort of the next major disaster, if you will. And a ton of the team that had worked together in Katrina reconvened down in Pisco. I worked in Katrina with a group that was then called Hands-On Disaster Response, or it was Hands-On USA, and then became Hands-On Disaster Response. It's now All Hearts, All Hands. Their specialty is in with spontaneous unaffiliated volunteers, or SUVs as they're known. SUVs are incredibly well-intending people who are profoundly problematic to have show up on site because they typically are unprepared to be able to take care of themselves, to be able to tap into doing help without overburdening the local network. So that's sort of what this group kind of focuses on, is collecting all of those people and channeling them and making them useful instead of a burden on the system. So at any rate, a ton of the team went down. And I really went to Peru to be with them, to be back in that environment and to begin doing the healing work that I needed to do from my own experience at Katrina. And if you'd asked me at the time, I'd say, look, I'm going to be helpful, right? But I'm not sure that always being, going to be helpful means actually jumping on an airplane. In fact, I think 99% of the time that's not actually what it means. But I was general labor volunteer, so I was out with a crowbar, sledgehammer, shovel, and a wheelbarrow, picking up the demolition. There were nearly 60,000 homes that were destroyed by the earthquake. It was a magnitude 8 earthquake that hit in mid-August. And in Pisco itself, they had lost, I think about 450 people had died. Tragically, about 150 of them died because they were either in mass in a cathedral or they ran into the cathedral itself when the earthquake began and it collapsed. So there was a tremendous amount of grief and of destruction. My time there was short. I was only there for I think 2.5 weeks, was entirely focused on rubble removing and a little bit on the reconstruction, the construction of homes through a Latin American organization called Techo para Mi Pies, which is a roof for my country, which is similar to Habitat for Humanity, putting up transitional housing structures, though, as opposed to permanent ones for people in need.
I think a lot of us, when we're younger, we are probably more idealistic, but there's always some takeaway, right? There's always something like, okay, like I may have done this, maybe this is I may or may not feel like comfortable with now, but what was like the one takeaway or the few takeaways that you had from those 2 weeks? Because I don't think there's anything linear, I guess, about life's experiences. You kind of take it as you go, but like what was the one takeaway that you had from those 2 weeks that you probably could not have gotten in the States?
Hmm. Good question. I think, I think being back with my people again, if you will, both at that 1 year anniversary and then coming back again, and seeing the work manifest in a different environment really set me on a journey trying to understand trauma and secondary trauma and resilience. I think one thing that is incredibly important anytime that there is a disaster is that there are some people from the outside, and that may look, like, me as an upstate New Yorker going down to Louisiana or Mississippi, or the other. I've done most of my work has been domestic outside of Peru, but the act of bearing witness, the act of being a story holder and a story carrier. So the ability to sit with people and to hear their stories and to carry those back and to help the rest of the world to understand that we are, particularly as Americans, we are deeply interconnected with the rest of the world. Peru is an example of that. Peru, which has a fantastic coffee crop, you can almost nowhere find a cup of good coffee. It's all Nescafé. And I remember asking somebody about this, and they said, well, why would we drink our gold, right? That coffee is the export. It's where they get their cash. Quinoa has another impact with the growth of quinoa interest. And the gold industry has resulted in a tremendous level of mercury poisoning in parts of Peru. And I think that being there helped me to understand the ways in which what we do here in the United States impacts the rest of the world. And you can learn that in textbooks, but I think that there's a way in which you can see it that helps, I don't know, bring it more to the forefront of your understanding.
And the thing which you just said, that Americans are deeply connected to the world. What did you like? How can you expand on that? That's a really interesting statement.
Yeah. So what we do in America holds huge weight in so many regards. So for example, I go back to the gold example. There is illegal mining. Much of the mining in Peru is probably not very safe, but particularly the illegal mines, because there's a market for it. You look at like the conflicts throughout Africa, where child soldiers have been tremendously deployed, have largely been around resources. And the US as an importer has often had a central part in that. iPhones, I shouldn't say iPhones specifically, but cell phones. I don't know if this is still true, but they used to use something called coltan, I think it is, which had a huge impact on the use of child soldiers in parts of Africa through illegal mining and then other needs for them as well. And so if we're constantly upgrading to the new model, it has implications the world over. When we choose to drink fair trade coffee, it's an important choice. I think, it can't be the only thing we do, but it's important that we do the basics as well as the more advanced work.
I remember in one of our seminary classes, we were talking about environmentalism and talking about how the Quran actually urges us to environmentalism. And I was on a webinar yesterday talking about a verse in the Quran about yamshuna fil ardi hona, that walking on the earth with a sense of humbleness, or walking on the earth with a sense of care for the way you're utilizing the earth as well. And many times people, because the literal word is walking on the earth, but it's literally conducting yourself. It's an idiom talking about the way we conduct ourselves. And as Muslims, we forget that aspect of it, because we end up thinking that, especially in a capitalist driven economy and market, that the cheapest, like, why would I buy something that's not the cheapest thing? But now you see that when it comes to reading on your label, it says high fructose corn syrup. Why am I picking up a candle? But when it says high fructose corn syrup, right, on like a can of soda, you'd rather, and a lot of people are coming to this awareness that is like, no, I want something with like cane sugar, or I want something with actual sugar in it, or something without sugar in it, like, because it benefits us. And it's a very, and not to call it narcissistic, but as humans, we're programmed to care for ourselves, and self-care is definitely important. But when it comes to another's life or another's trade or another's work, we need to worry about that supply chain. Like, what is the process that is leading me to have, one of these, or what is it that leading me to have this piece of paper? And I think a lot of folks forget that. And if people became a bit more real, especially if we used our faith to actualize that idea, it would go a long way. But I think there is often a cognitive dissonance associated with our practice of faith and our lived faith.
Tremendously. And I think especially when we think about food and the focus on, Zabiha slaughter, there's a huge movement now, alhamdulillah, finally, that's really starting to expand what we mean for meat to be good for us to eat. And an increasing number of vegetarians in our midst, which I think is really an important contribution to inching us toward Ihsan as well.
Yeah, and I think people need to become a bit more aware, right? No one is saying that like stop eating meat in totality. People are like it's even like it's actually interesting. I heard this the other day. There was actually a companion. His name was Amir, and he actually just didn't like meat, and he didn't eat meat, right? But at the same time, like when we understand at the high rate of consumption that we're going through animals, Imam Dawood Yassin had actually brought this up. He was like, once upon a time, you knew the faith of the person that slaughtered the meat, that skinned it, that cooked it, and brought it to your plate. And now we don't know any of that. And obviously that will have a spiritual effect on our ability to work in this world if we're not aware of what we're consuming.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to take a brief break, and we'll be back with the Chaplain Jaye Starr. And in the meantime, I wanted to play a small video about Beit al-Mal. So we shall be right back once I find this video. Here we go. Bismillah.
Every year around the world, natural disasters, civil unrest, extreme poverty, and deadly diseases drive people from their homes, turn families' lives upside down, and keep communities struggling. For many, all that is left is hope. Hope that the water they drink won't make them sick. Hope that they have enough food to survive another day. Hope that they have a safe place to stay and rest their head tonight. Hope that help will come and that someone, somewhere, cares. You are their hope. And together, we are their family. Join us as we respond to emergencies with life-saving food, water, medicine, hygiene, and shelter. Sustain families with meals, water wells, sanitation, and healthcare. And empower communities to thrive with life-enriching programs to rise above poverty and improve their lives. We deliver hope to people in need around the world. Turn your compassion into hope.
Okay, we are back with Chaplain Jaye Starr. We've been talking about charity. We've been talking about the idea of consumption. We've been talking about volunteer work. Jaye, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about something. You had mentioned that you had visited a decade after the tsunami. And is that you went back to Peru, are you saying? Or
No. So in 2014, I was blessed to study in Indonesia for a semester through Hartford Seminary. And I went back to visit Aceh, which had been impacted. Part of the reason that I responded to Katrina was because a year before, not even a year before, we'd had the Christmas Day tsunami that had just tremendously impacted. And I remembered watching on TV as a college student, just being desperate to help in some way, shape, or form. So when Katrina came, it was really sort of the opportunity to actually respond. But I think, the long-term career goal, inshallah, for me is to be able to do chaplaincy work and disaster relief work together. I think that chaplains have a really, really valuable skill set to bring into disaster relief work. So many of the people who are impacted right now by conflict and by climate change in this world and by war, or by natural disasters more broadly, are Muslims. And to be able to bring in the skills that Muslim chaplains bring, I think there's just a huge need for to inform the relief efforts, so that there are, when most international organizations come in, they're often bringing what are called psychosocial supports to help people in recovering from the trauma. But there's a tremendous piece of Islam that's missing from that table. Visiting Aceh a decade after the tsunami, you can still see so many of the ways that it has impacted people. But at least
this is the 2004 tsunami.
Yeah, the 2004 tsunami.
And you visited in 2014.
14, yeah. And
you still saw the effects of it.
You still see the effects. You see the effects on the ground. You also see the effects in the lived embodied experience of people. And the image that stands so strongly with me from that visit is a picture that hangs up. There's a beautiful masjid that has been really beautifully refurbished, and there's a picture in the back of people showing up to pray. And I want to say that it's Maghrib that they're praying, but it may be Fajr. And everything around the masjid has just been obliterated. It's the entire community was washed out to the ocean.
Wow.
And people came together and they prayed. And it's such a profoundly moving experience. And I think that there's a richness of Islam that can help people to address the experiences that they are living through, that it hasn't been as fully present at the table, I think, as it always could be. And so my hope is that we will start to see more and more Muslim chaplains help to bring some of what we have to offer.
Wow. I actually didn't know that the seminary used to do semesters abroad. I had no idea.
It was amazing. It was funded through the Henry Luce Fellowship, and I spent a semester in Yogyakarta taking 4 classes, and it was a profoundly enriching opportunity. Wow,
that's amazing. What classes did you end up taking over there?
So I got to take this is really fascinating. I took 2 PhD courses. One looking at the way in which religions are used in conflict situations. So verses that we would normally not look to in all of the traditions, or as contemporary teaching is with such a direct framework, if you will, get used when there's conflict, right? Deuteronomy. So there's teachings in Deuteronomy for Christians that the vast majority of Christians never turn to. But when there's a conflict situation, they will turn to them as grounds for killing people. And we certainly have those within our own scripture too. I took a class on religion, state, and society that was really interesting in thinking about how secular governments and religious governments are different depending on which context you look at. There's 36 forms of secularism in the world. The U.S. is not the only one by any stretch.
36 forms of secularism.
36 forms. That was a couple of years ago, so maybe it's changed. But yeah, very, very different. I could go on, but that's not really where the focus is. So a class on gender and religion. That was a really fascinating look at the deeply Islamically informed work of women in Indonesia to bring about equality. And gosh, my God, research methods class.
Nice. That must have been an eye-opening and life-changing experience.
Yes, it was incredible.
Wow, mashallah. That's cool. I actually wanted to talk also about some of the other work that you're doing, because it seems between Katrina, between Peru, and between Indonesia, like we should start a podcast, Jaye, between Peru, Katrina, and Indonesia, because it seems that you've grasped onto so many experiences and you've done a lot with those experiences and trying to make meaning out of it, in trying to produce some aspect of direction from it. And I think you're working on a project right now about it's an Islamic chaplaincy guide, is it?
Yeah, not a guide, but I'm co-editing with chaplains Omar Bajwa and Muhammad Ali and Sanas Khalaki a collection of essays by Muslim chaplains. And I think that there's the role of the Muslim chaplain plays a big place in the American Muslim imagination, and yet many people don't actually know what it is that we do. And through storytelling, we are trying to share that with the broader world. I think in many ways, I spoke earlier about Kate Bostrop's book, Here If You Need Me. And I would like to give some of what that book gave me to the American Muslim community. And I hope that people will read in these stories and see, that's something that I might like to do, or know that when they are in a hospital, they can call a chaplain, and whatever faith the chaplain is, the chaplain will be there to accompany them and help them to access their own resources. So it's Mantle of Mercy, Islamic Chaplaincy in North America, and it is forthcoming, inshallah, from Templeton Press in the fall.
That's cool. That must be exciting.
Yeah, I am. It'll be good when it's done. Alhamdulillah, it's been an enriching journey.
Yeah. Let me also ask you this: for those of us that aren't on the ground, a lot of people want to go, and even the Quran talks about this aspect of like joining the Prophet in his expeditions, but then having to stay behind for whatever reason, right? And a lot of people wanted to go out with him, but they weren't able to. For those of us that are here at home or listening in front of computers or watching online, what is it that a lot of us can do to help our brothers and sisters in humanity who are struggling all throughout the world?
Yeah. So I think that there are a number of different ways. We spoke earlier about the importance of understanding sort of where our role is in supply chain demand and making conscientious decisions that are informed by our faith, not just conscientious, but that really are informed by the teachings of the faith. I joked earlier, but it's very true. The people of Peru didn't just need people to come and help. Probably the $450 I spent on my flight would have been better used to employ Peruvians to do the work that I was doing in a volunteer capacity. We so often want to give clothing, we want to give food, we want to give the material objects, but overwhelmingly, it is so much better for systems if we give money. And to give an example of that, if we collect a bunch of clothes here and we send them to, let's say West Africa, this is an example of a place that's been hugely impacted by this. What's happened is that the cotton farmers have been put out of business, and the clothing manufacturers there have been put out of business because they're getting clothes that are coming for free and being sold or given away either given away or sold incredibly cheaply. So in our attempts to help, we've decimated a whole portion of the economy and then put people in a position where they become reliant on aid to assist them. So I think that's one, is like overwhelmingly what is really needed is that we give money. The other thing is that if we give money, they can buy things locally that help to infuse money into the local economy. So if food is being bought locally, it has a huge impact on the whole economic system. And even if it's not bought in the immediate area because of scarcity, that purchase can go on through regional areas. And then the other thing I think that is really big to hold up is listening. And listening without preaching to people, without spiritually bypassing what they're saying, but affirming the hardship that they are experiencing. Because in doing that story sharing, and in our end as friends and colleagues, when we can bear witness to people, it can help them in doing the meaning making themselves. We can't meaning make for other people. They've got to get to that themselves. And before they can get to it, they have to be able to put the pieces together. I think, this for me has been very much a part of COVID. I had to pull out of my hospital residency because my daughter has some medical complications. So to give her a little bit of protection for my work at the hospital, I left. It was really hard to step out, like disaster and chaplaincy, like this is my thing. But also recognizing that I can be on the receiving end. Chaplains can call and they can share the hard things that they're experiencing with me as somebody who can help hold those stories. It's been really important, but I think that companioning is something that often friends and family can do if they sit back and listen and just hold those stories for people.
Yeah, I think learning to hold space is something we need to do. I think often as chaplains, we know this, that people always try to fill empty space with things, and that's not necessarily necessary, right? That's not needed. What sometimes we need to do is just let the stay there. Let the lack of something even be felt so that eventually something can fill it and heal it and give it wholeness. But I think many of us don't understand that. And the reason I was asking was because there are certain situations, like in Yemen, unfortunately, people may donate money, but nothing can get into the country, right? So people are donating, and you have these publicity stunts that the government will do, or other countries will do. It's like, oh yeah, we let one like relief truck in, right? And this one relief truck is going to provide aid to 40,000 people, right? Like this one relief truck is going to do that. But I think, and I think this is happening also in like the West African countries as well, in the Senegambia region. You have like a lot of people going to volunteer, but it's like every one other person has a charity there, right? So now it kind of becomes this showcasing of like, oh, we're doing this work, right? It's almost like, instead of imperial capitalism, you have imperial charity kind of on the ground, right? And you have these charities that are literally running things. And I think that's starting to also become a problem in a lot of countries.
Absolutely. Yeah. And whose logo, when we collaborate, whose logo gets front and center.
Yeah. Yeah. Like this branding, and we end up forgetting the actual mission of the work that actually matters.
Yeah. But still, so I mean, if you look at like, right, there's certainly a challenge getting things through to Yemen. But even if you look at what are the other countries that are surrounding where things could be purchased and perhaps shipped from as that limits up, and you think about the unemployment in places like Egypt that is sky high. So just, I think, the kind of big picture around
the whole situation. Yeah, it's something for us to consider. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Most people don't ever want to get in touch with me, but I can. Is there a chat someplace I can put my email address if people want to do that?
Yeah, I can put it up onto the screen.
Yeah,
so you want me to just add your email?
There. All I just ask is that it's Ramadan, and we are crunching to finish the edits on this book to get it off to the publisher before the end of the month. So please be generous in allowing me some time to respond. Yeah.
So I think what do you call it? So the book is right now like your main Ramadan, like at night worshiping God.
Yeah, this has been, alhamdulillah, this has been the focus of the whole past year. So, I think about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is really the best of planners. I was heartbroken to have to leave my residency, and yet, alhamdulillah, like we were able to do this book, and we wouldn't have been able to do it had I been in residency. So, well, things come through.
Inshallah, you're able to get back into residency soon, hopefully after things pass. But I also wanted to let everyone know that Beit al-Mal recently made its way into Peru through an organization called SIRA. So there were, I guess, families that have been deeply impacted, Muslim families, by COVID, and other people by COVID as well. Actually, the COVID numbers in Peru are really bad right now. So they definitely need help and they need relief. But right now, Beit al-Mal has provided relief to about 35 families there. And they're hoping to expand and get donors to, inshallah, donate there. So if you would like, there should be a link in the description to wherever you're watching, that if you would like to, inshallah, donate, you can donate towards Peru. You can put in the tagline Peru, and inshallah, your money will be allocated towards there. But this has been really nice.
You want to hold up? So we spoke just a little bit earlier about how there is a Muslim population there, which I think many people may not be familiar. Did you want to hold that up?
Yeah, sure. You want to go ahead and
go ahead.
Okay. Well, so a lot of you may not know. So South America, after World War II, a lot of Muslims, specifically Arabs from the Levant region, which was under the Ottoman Empire at that time, it was like Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Armenia, and and all those other countries in the area, the Jordan area as well. A lot of people actually immigrated to South America at that time period. And they went to South America because they were looking to restart their lives, and the economies were bad and the countries were crumbling. But they didn't come to North America because from 1925 to 1965, roughly, there was a ban on non-white immigrants coming to America. So to the United States. So a lot of them ended up going to South America. So in that time period, you had a lot of people that left, but also in the early 1800s, or the late 1800s, there was a famine that had struck the area, and a lot of people ended up migrating to South America. So you'll find indigenous Muslims living in former Spanish colonies, which are now independent countries, like Peru, like all the areas in South America that were once occupied by either the Portuguese or the Spanish or the French, and even obviously English Guyana, right? All of these areas had Muslims or people that had influx from all these different countries settled therein, and that's why you'll find such a tremendous number of people of Arab descent of 4 or 5 generations in that region.
I have one more interesting fact about it to add. In 1974, the Nation of Islam began importing Pacific whiting fish from Peru as a replacement, so they wouldn't be reliant on the rest of the American industry.
Wow, okay.
A little bit of NOI connection there to Peruvian history.
You know what's interesting, Jay? I feel like after we read history, we are very astounded by it. But what's interesting is that we shouldn't really be, because the world is so interconnected, but we have this American exceptionalist education, which makes us the center. It's like, wow, we had, there was this diversity that existed therein. I'm just like, it is cool to learn, but at the same time, it's just there's a natural mixing and matching that America is very much so a part of. Morocco was the first country to recognize America's independence from the British. A Muslim monarchy recognized America's independence.
We are all interconnected.
So many different aspects. We are.
Which is why I will hold up also, I think the trauma healing part of war and disaster is so critically important, because if we don't give people the support and to heal, conflicts will continue to occur over and over and over again, especially as we have increased connection with our environmental destruction.
Yeah, and I think the ability to use history to connect our roots as opposed to disassociate ourselves will go a very long way in actually utilizing our own historical and intellectual tradition to heal as opposed to divide.
Yeah, indeed. Inshallah.
Cool. All right. Well, this has been awesome. We're going to be ending the stream now. For those of you that would like to get in contact with Chaplain Jay Starr, j.starr.boz@gmail.com. It's right on the screen. Continue to support Beit al-Mal and all the work that they do. Thank you, everyone.